Hey guys, welcome back to more Entitled Neighbor Stories. In this video, a Karen extended his property by stealing my own and building something in my garden. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. So I inherited a house from my aunt that really meant a lot to me because growing up I was there almost as much as I was at my house. To the point that I even had my own room at my aunt's house and it felt like a second home to me. I was not there a lot because I had neglectful parents or anything, but because my mom had cancer and there was just a lot of times my dad would be with her at the hospital and did not want me to be alone, but also didn't want to have me constantly there since I was just a kid and it was a lot to deal with. So anyway, I got close to my aunt and the house had a lot of memories of having a ton of fun and forgetting for a while that home was difficult for a few years actually. My mom would get better and then worse again, so it was a lot of me at this house. She ended up being fine though. For anybody worried about this turning depressing or something, my aunt did die last year and it was heartbreaking for everybody and especially me. I did not know that she was leaving me the house, even though my parents did, as she wanted it to be a nice surprise. I was living in a crappy apartment, so getting an entire house that was paid off was huge for me. I was able to get a jump on starting my life and she really did always look out for me, and I guess she wanted that to continue even after she was gone. All of this to explain that the house was more than brick and mortar or a step up for me in life. It was a place full of some of my best memories. One thing that I was going to make sure did not change was the fact that my aunt always had an amazing garden. As a kid, I loved the flowers and she taught me how to take care of them, which actually stayed in my brain after all these years. It was a huge private garden that she had tiny little fences to keep things separated and organized. The fact that the house and the yard were both in such great condition meant that it was a valuable piece of property. Not that I was gonna sell it, but a good house in a good neighborhood is like the poster for a perfect and expensive home. To add even more value was the location of this house. I don't want to get too specific into where I live for safety reasons, but I will say that from where I'm driving into NYC is not hard at all, but I'm still in the suburbs and not having to deal with the city anymore, where my crap apartment was before all of this. The only issue I was having was this neighbor that lived next door. I don't remember him from being a kid, but from the things he said, he must have been living there for a long time. I just never met her neighbors or was not paying attention because child brain. Now this neighbor though decided that he was gonna do some construction work and expand his own home. Whatever, that should not be a big deal aside from the fact that he pulled a bunch of bushes that were acting as a natural fence between our properties and building right into our garden. Now the bushes were on his property, so he had every right to get rid of them if he wanted to. What he could not do was expand his house right onto my property. The rule here is that your house needs to be 10 feet away from the property line, and he was going way over. I went to speak to him to see what he was thinking and that maybe the construction people got confused. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt instead of jumping right into my angry place. Me, hey, I think your construction guys might be building in the wrong spot. Neighbor, what do you mean? Me, they dug up the garden on my property and seem to have well crossed over the property line. Neighbor, oh, don't worry about it, I'm just going a little bit over. You will still have plenty of room. Me, well, that's not the point. You cannot just build past the line and on my property. I do need it. In fact, you just destroyed my late aunt's garden. I was now getting mad as it was clear that he knew what was happening and just choosing to ignore it. I knew that this construction could not have been legal or they didn't have a permit or something. There was just no way this was really allowed. Me, listen, there is no way you have a permit for this. I can get somebody from the town to come down and shut this whole thing down. Or you can just back it up to not be on my property. Neighbor, you don't need that piece of garden. There's not even anything there anymore. Your aunt was a nice neighbor and I think that you should just be good like her. Instead of making a bad impression where the entire block is gonna label you as the crazy neighbor, you don't want to start a new life here like that. I knew I was not getting anywhere with him, and the fact that he was trying to guilt trip me into letting it happen was even worse. I decided to say screw this and just get things done no matter how it caused people to look at me. I called the town who said they would get somebody to look into it, but it turned out to not be that simple. I did not have any papers showing where the property line was, there were no property markers, and my neighbor had papers showing where he was building was actually his land. So basically they couldn't do anything to stop him without proof. I'm not smart enough to figure this out alone, so I called a lawyer to help me find out what to do, because I wanted this settled before his extension was finished, because then it would be even more of an annoyance to get rid of it. Before I did any action though that the lawyer told me to do, I wanted to give my neighbor one last chance. I told him that if he stopped building, I would not even sue him for damaging the garden, but if he continued, I was gonna take legal action against him. He told me that I was bluffing, and if I went to court, the only thing that would happen was that he would make me look like a total idiot. Then told me to either get on board with being a good neighbor or maybe find a different place to live. I consulted my lawyer on the next steps for legal action against him. He told me to get an official land surveyor from a company that was approved by the city. I did, and I honestly don't know how they managed to do this with no landmarkers, but he was able to figure out where the property line was and that the neighbor was clearly going over it with his construction. I brought that to the city, who was not happy to have two totally different, seemingly legit surveys of the same land, and the neighbor was finally ordered to just stop construction dead in its tracks until this got sorted out. The neighbor was beyond angry about this and was giving me dirty looks and kept telling me that I was gonna lose. He also kept trying to talk crap about me to the other neighbors, but it turns out that he was a bit of a problem and none of them took what he said at face value. They could even see how awkward the extension was looking and that it clearly was crossing the line into my property. I did not need to defend myself because people could see for themselves what was going on. The local town stepped in to investigate everything going on and get to the bottom of it. They basically threw out both of our property surveys and instead did about 3 of their own to just be extra sure about where the property line was. He was told that he was over the line and they put down new markers and told him to get rid of what he had already built. You would think that he would stop once the town was making him, but he was trying to still get away with it. He was claiming that now what was built being destroyed would ruin the stability of his house, and he wanted to get them to approve him going over into my garden, trying to claim that it was a waste of money to remove it and the renovation would be great for the property value. None of what he tried to do worked, including trying to convince me it would be a good idea and to just look the other way and let him finish anyway after all the crap he pulled. He was forced to demolish it all, but that's not the end, because I was still gonna take him to civil court for the damage done to my garden. He had to pay me a nice sum of money, but was also forced to either build a fence or plant new bushes to put back the property barrier that he previously destroyed. He opted for bushes again, and it was actually a little funny because it turned out to look almost the same as before he started all of this. The only difference, of course, being that he lost so much money between construction and the lawsuit, only to basically end up in the exact same position as before. He could have just set the money on fire and it would have been the same thing, basically just with less time spent in court. I felt really satisfied for knocking this guy down a peg or 2. I restored the garden and used tips my aunt gave me years ago to get it back looking as good as I remembered it being as a kid. When I first moved in, the garden life was not in great shape because nobody had been maintaining it for a few months before she died. I think that neighbor is a little embarrassed about what happened because it's been like a year and I have not exchanged 2 words with him. When he sees me, he just rushes into his house like talking to me would be traumatic. I'm just glad that his threats of making me look like a bad neighbor did not come true, because I made a lot of friends on the block and they are all nice people outside of him. None of them think that I'm some crazy lawsuit money hungry person or Karen of a neighbor. It brings me a nice sense of relief, honestly, to have things be calm and hoping I can make my aunt proud with how I take care of her house and garden. And the next one is titled Thieving Neighbor. Several years ago, I heard my sweet neighbor and another woman arguing on the sidewalk. I looked closer and noticed that they were both pulling a plant pot in different directions and were about to fight. No clue what was up, but I knew my neighbor. If she was arguing, she was usually right. Me and my husband went over to intervene. My husband wanted to help make peace. Me? I was just going to help my neighbor, no questions asked. Why the argument? Well, the other woman was a new neighbor. Our nice neighbor noticed that her plant pots were missing and were in the new neighbor's yard. Yep, the new neighbor had stolen nice neighbor's plants, plant pots and yard decor and decorated her yard with it. My nice neighbor had hand-painted several pots that were in her yard and thus they were easy to identify as hers. We all walked over to the new neighbor's yard to get our other neighbor's stuff back. When we got to the new neighbor's yard, we noticed several things looked both weird and very familiar. Oh yeah, and the new neighbor had called the cops on us, or at least someone did. Anyway, the new neighbor had planted patches of different types of grass all over the yard in a checkerboard pattern, as well as mismatched shrubs and flowers. I looked at our house a little closer and yep, we were missing grass patches from the side of the house and one of our shrubs. When the police arrived, well, the new neighbor was adamant that the plants, pots, grass, shrubs and yard decor were just hers. She informed the cop that she dug them up from other yards in the middle of the night and planted them, and yep, she claimed finders keepers. It didn't quite work out though. My nice neighbor insisted on pressing charges for petty theft and destruction of property. We just dug up our grass patches and replanted them, some of them even survived it. Nosy neighbors kept walking by after the new neighbor was arrested. As we were digging things up, we explained why to them. Neighbors kept recognizing their stuff from her yard, and one neighbor asked if we had seen a picnic table, as his was missing. We had not thought to check the backyard, but yep, the picnic table and a yard full of her finders keepers haul. She moved pretty much right afterwards. We did not miss her. Edit: for those pointing out that it's petty and not petite theft, well thank you, however petite theft is correct by Florida law. And yes, this happened in Florida, it might explain a lot. Florida law section 812014, petite theft is defined as when a person steals property from a person or business valued at less than $750. And the next one is titled, Am I the a-hole for telling my neighbor no? And by the way, Ripe Stars, if you have any interesting stories to share about your own neighbors, then please head over to r/Ripe Stories on Reddit, where you can share your own stories and there's a good chance that I will read them in a video. So anyway, the house across from me sold recently. The prior owners built it and lived in it for almost 50 years. They were lovely people and they are missed. I did not meet the new neighbors until recently. They are living there only intermittently while renovations are being done. Anyway, we both live on a very busy, double yellow line street, and while street parking is not illegal per se, it's definitely dangerous as it is a busy, relatively narrow, high-traffic road. The neighbor's house has a smallish driveway that can fit maybe 6 cars, and with the setup of the yard, there's really no lawn parking. I, on the other hand though, have a very large, circular driveway that can probably fit 15 to 20 cars if needed. But there's only one entrance and exit point to the street. So basically, I was out getting my mail the other day and the neighbor was outside too. She came over, introduced herself, and we chatted briefly. Then she said, "May I ask a favor of you?" I laughed and said, "Well, you can ask." Anyway, long story short, she said that they were having a house party the weekend after the 4th of July. They were expecting a large number of people and were hoping that they could use my driveway for parking as street parking is difficult. I said, "Sorry, no, it will block me in. I'm fine with your guests parking on the grass in front of my fence. I have a small fence about 8 foot from the street and there's a grass strip in front of it. The Smiths, prior house owners, would often use it if they were hosting a large group." She then said, "Oh, I appreciate that, but that will only fit about 6 cars. We're going to need parking for another 10 to 12 beyond what fits in my driveway." I again said, "I'm sorry, I cannot offer you use of my driveway without it being a significant inconvenience to us. I'm going to have to say no." She then says, "Well, my guests can park along the side and back of your driveway so you can still get in and out." I said, "Again, I'm going to have to say no. I'm not comfortable with your guests on my property and the only light I have at night is my post light out front. It's very dark at night and I wouldn't want anyone to trip or get hurt." She started to look frustrated and said, "Well, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't think they can all park on the street." I says, "Yes, I know parking can be frustrating here. There are a couple of municipal buildings nearby. It might be worth calling the town to see if you can use their parking lot since, well, it's a weekend and maybe shuttle people or have them walk. Other than that, I'm not sure." It is one of the downsides of living on a busy street. I then excused myself and went back inside, and now every time I see her, she just kinda gives me a dirty look and says nothing. I don't really care about my neighbor not being neighborly, as we prefer to keep to ourselves anyway, but am I the a-hole for not letting her use my driveway for parking? Edit: since many of you asked, no, she did not invite me to her party. Another edit: a lot of people are amazed by the large driveways. I live in a former farm town that is now a suburb in the US, and houses are on wanted 3-acre lots, usually in the middle. So they all have long driveways to access the house. This is very, very common in my area and nothing special. And the first comment said, "Not the a-hole, I understand that she is disappointed, but she doesn't have a right. You're very generous in allowing her guests parking on the outside of the fence." But you've already said that you don't have a lot of light outside, so what happens if one of them trips and gets really hurt? That's your property insurance, not theirs. She cannot guarantee what her guests will or will not do. Even if you said yes, she cannot guarantee that they will park in the exact designated spots and not cause any problems. No is a complete sentence. The shuttle idea, though, is the winner. Comment number 2, you did the smartest thing, because if someone hurts themselves on your property, it is a mess. If someone decides to get drunk and damage your property, it will be a mess. I would have said no and not given a huge explanation. I don't know folks well enough to offer too much info, but maybe if I knew them well enough, I would give some more context, but it sounds like you're not very close with the new neighbors. I'd also be careful, as they might still have folks parking on your property. So maybe plan ahead, because I have a neighbor who every year puts up large "Don't Park" signs, as his property shares the street side for firework views. He is wise to do that to get ahead of the mess that is the folks trashing his yard and parking over his plants. Or blocking his driveway. Just plan ahead. And yeah, ripe stars, if you would have been in OP's shoes, what would you have done here? What would you suggest OP to do? Let me know in the comments. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. The title story starts like this. This story is not about me, but is actually about one of my neighbors who is a Vietnam veteran. He has given me permission to tell this story online after I got him interested in these kinds of stories. We are actually pretty close, and since he lives alone, I always invite him over for holidays if he is alone or just to watch baseball. Getting back on the topic of this story, he is disabled and relies on a service dog for everyday tasks. His service dog is a beautiful German Shepherd that is just the sweetest girl in the entire world. As a service dog, she is better behaved than most humans I've come across, and I could not imagine anybody having an issue with her. That is except for the HOA president, who does not approve of the dog and thinks she had any say in it. I did not know how long my neighbor was having issues with her, but I did manage to catch a conversation between the two of them. After that, I was just fully invested to throw myself into the situation to help my neighbor. HOA president: I've told you before that this creature needs to leave. Neighbor: I'm allowed to have my service dog. HOA president: I'm not telling you not to have one. I'm saying that this thing is not a dog, it's basically a bear. Look around and you will see that all the other dog owners have nice cute small dogs. They don't intimidate anybody and don't lower property values like your monster. Neighbor: I need a dog this size. She is mine and does important tasks for me. Now please move so I can get on with my day. HOA president: Your dog is gonna bite some innocent child and then we'll see what happens. You need to follow the rules no matter how old you are and how disabled you pretend to be. Neighbor: I've told you before, I'm not a member of your HOA. Even if what you were saying had any truth to it, it still wouldn't apply to me. HOA president: We'll see what you think of that once I'm finished with you. She walked off after this, and I was able to go and make sure that he was okay. He might be on the older side, but this guy is tough as nails and was not gonna be intimidated by a woman made of hairspray and acrylic nails. He was going to just go on with his life because he had the ADA on his side. Laws that protected him against anybody trying to discriminate against him, and that included taking his dog away from him. The HOA must have not told their lawyers the truth or just been crazy, because they actually filed a lawsuit against my neighbor for his dog. They claim total lies, that he had a violent animal that went against HOA guidelines. He cannot drive anymore, so I went with him to court to argue his case that he didn't do anything wrong. Which to me was kind of funny, that to argue his dog being a service dog, he got to bring her to court with him. The judge was gonna be able to see flat out how well behaved she was and that she was a real service animal. It was closed and I had to wait outside, but I got the details of what happened from my neighbor on the car ride home. The HOA was trying to claim that he was violating rules because he was intentionally doing actions that would lower the value of the neighborhood and the homes in it. They were also claiming that he was harboring a dangerous creature that was a threat to all the members of the community. I couldn't even get past the first part without just laughing at how crazy this woman was. Thank God I was not in court, or I would have been kicked out and in trouble for the laughter. When it was made clear that his dog was a service animal and having the dog did not devalue the neighborhood and went against HOA rules, they tried to argue something else. The HOA wanted him to get a dog from a pre-approved list and basically swap his service animal for a tiny one. While some small breeds can be service animals, he needed help that only a larger animal could help with. Not to mention, it was just against so many laws to make him get rid of a service animal. The court did not want to hear anything from the HOA and told them that they were not going to do anything against the HOA or force somebody who was not even a member to follow their rules. A couple of months later, when he was taking a walk, the HOA president was out and got super angry at him, basically on sight. She went insane and decided that attacking was the correct thing to do. She did not attack my neighbor, oh no, she went after the helpless dog like she was the one personally doing anything wrong. No matter how well a dog is trained when under attack, it's gonna defend itself. It's the law of nature, or fight or flight or something. To make a long story short, because this is already getting long, she got bitten by the dog while attacking her. Suddenly she was the victim and the dog just went wild and was a vicious, horrible creature according to her. You can probably guess what her plan was, but she made the dumb decision to do this right in front of a park entrance, and they had cameras. Before she could do anything, my neighbor jumped the gun and filed a lawsuit against the HOA. For discrimination and for hurting his service animal, it turned out that in the attack their dog got broken ribs and a broken foot. He wanted a lot of compensation from the HOA, and once the court saw that it was her again, they were not gonna believe her anything. Sure, she tried to claim that the dog just attacked randomly, but there was clear video of her going after the dog first and it basically being self-defense. All of this to try and turn around the argument of her not being a service dog because they don't bite no matter what, supposedly. Like they are trained super soldiers or something. ADA law is a powerful thing though, and the courts have a strong tendency to side with it. After they finished racking up fines for her, the HOA ended up owing my neighbor $225,000. Don't ask me the math of how they ended up on that number, but he was granted all of it and the HOA was now going to be financially hurting because of that. Thankfully, the HOA president did not last much longer after that whole fiasco either, as it was a bad image for the HOA. I have no idea where the money went, but I do know that he got a big new TV that we watch all the time. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. And also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much and I will see you again tomorrow.